Okay, so thank you. I think a lot about Randy's picture, about you all falling asleep, because I'm lucky enough to have the last talk before the coffee break. So please, if you feel very tired, stand up, shake a bit, because I want you to be awake for my talk, okay? So it's a pleasure to have been invited here to have the opportunity to talk about our experience in MAS HLH with Etoposide. And when I say our experience, I mean the experience from us at Karolinska. And I work there as a pediatric rheumatologist, but I also do my research within the cancer unit. So I see myself as an actually true bridge between these two specialities. And my talk today, which will be brief, is first I'm going to give you a background, and then I'm going to present our case series, and then I'm going to give 2 cases with pulmonary involvement and do some conclusions. And I would actually like to start giving my acknowledgements. The clinical unit, my research unit, with Professor Jan-Inge Henter, who I work very closely in collaboration with, and the Histiocyte Society. I'm the chair of the MAS working group there. And I also really would like to thank the families of our affected children. They have sent me some pictures which they would like me to present, so I will do that. And then I have to say that 15 minutes or 20 minutes is short, so I've stolen quite a lot of pictures from Google Images. I have not said where I've taken them, but I think pictures give more information than words. And I don't have anything to declare. Okay, so for the last 20 years, I dedicated my research to HLH, and thanks to Randy and Fabrizio, I don't need to go into detail about this slide. I would say HLH as the abbreviation, and when I studied, it was very clear-cut. It was the primary cases, and it was the secondary cases. And here I've indicated rheumatology conditions and inflammatory disorders as secondary, but I agree with Fabrizio and Randy that we are learning more, and perhaps MAS is a more separate entity. But during the years, we have understood that these 2 entities are not so easy. They are not so clear-cut. They do integrate much more. But what we have learned is that primary cases are usually younger, and they do need very heavy therapy. And up to today, the only proper cure is a bone marrow transplant. So I think the question of my talk, and perhaps the question you wonder, should Etoposide be used in MAS? This is my favorite pictures when I give a talk about MAS. I think all of us in this room, both families and physicians, we can agree with this picture. Where you can see it as a volcano, you don't know by whom it's going to erupt, and you don't know how severe the consequences are going to get from this eruption. Etoposide is actually comes from the plants. It's an alkaloid, and I looked up in English. I know what it's called in Swedish, but in English I think it's called a May apple. And it has many names, and it's an anti-cancer drug. But I think what I want to show with this picture is that actually it's been proven by Michael Jordan in 2014 that it acts very specifically at the T lymphocytes are activated. We also know from previous studies that it can induce apoptosis in those activated cells. Can I actually see somewhere else with this? Wasn't it something below here? Well, I look a bit like this where now something happened. Is it going? Here we go. I just wanted to check if you're awake. And with this picture, it wasn't meant to be black, but magical. This is a locked, turned down volcano. Our hopes is, of course, that we can, in desperate cases, close down the volcano with Etoposide. So etoposide is used in MAS, and this is the study by Randy and Angela Ravelli, which also the Histiocyte Society participated in, where we collected 362 patients to develop the new criteria. And information about etoposide were known in 339 cases, and of those, there were 12% who were given etoposide. And we had an abstract or a poster at the last year's press, and we could show that these patients were, of course, much more sick than the ones who were not given, because you take that after the other medicines, but the mortality were not more in that group. Oh. So what have we learned from the primary? This is data from Professor Janka, who was sort of our mother of research within the primary field. And in the 80s, it was a very bleak outcome for children with primary HLH. The chances of survival were almost zero. And with the etoposide, it has been, let me see if this comes. Yeah, it was a success. We have managed to get survival up to 65%. It may show that this is, of course, not what we would. We would like to have 100%. We just published, it's available online in Blood, the outcome of the 2004 protocol. And unfortunately, we don't have a higher significant. You can see here, it's a higher, does this work now? I brought this, no? You see it is higher, it's a trend, but it's not statistically significant. Our highest mortality is after transplantation. So compared to other non-malignant disease, we have an outcome after bone marrow transplantation of 65%. In other non-malignant disease, it's usually up to 90% survival. So we have to learn how to make these children survive after transplantation. What about the risks? Why don't we use etoposide all the time, if this is good? Oh, come on. Come see. Well, I take in this a black box warning, and this is the text. It says, this has to be used by caution with physicians who are known to cancer drugs, because there could be severe myelosuppression. And also, it's the secondary malignancies that one is afraid of. That's why rheumatologists don't like to use this drug. There are a lot of literature, but I went to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, and they published in 2012 where they do states on the actual risks of cancerogenic for humans. And what they say, yes, there is a true evidence if you use etoposide in combination with other drugs, which we do for many leukemias, many cancer drugs, you combine drugs, and then there is a true evidence. But for etoposide alone, it's limited evidence, and in animal models, there is non-existing evidence. So, being the study coordinator of the HLH 2004 protocol, we looked upon the data, and we found that patients who were older, more than 1 year, and did not have a genetic mutation or a family history of HLH, so we could not be sure they were primary cases. These could well be secondary cases, but they were still treated with our protocol. They died, and they died within the first 6 weeks, and we did not expect to see this. And what did they die of? They died of toxicity. So we went back to the protocol. In both the 94 and 2000 protocol, we gave etoposide of a doses of 150 milligram per square meter. In the first weeks, we give it very intensive. You give it twice a week, and then we give it once a week. So we learned from this, and we thought, these children who are not have a primary, they probably shouldn't have this intensive therapy because they can't cope. We are killing our patients. We need to give them less. And now I'm going to show you our case. It's 6 cases with MIS. We have given this protocol for other secondary HLHs, but I will only focus on the ones with the rheumatology conditions. It will be quite a lot of data, so I will take you through my slide. Of course, we treat patients with MAS first with steroids, cyclosporin, AnnaCarin. So why did these patients give etoposide? They were very sick. I think they would all have died if we hadn't treated them. I also would like you to know that we collaborate very closely with our intensive care unit. We are very proactive, giving them prophylactic and also look at the coagulation measurements. Oh, sorry, I was one slide ahead of myself, because this is what did we think to do. It's very simple. I'm like Fabrizio said, I like it simple. I'm not a true basic researcher. So instead of giving 150 milligram twice a week, we give 50 to 100 milligram once a week. Not rocket science, but it worked. Okay, so here are our 6 patients. Let me see if my pointer works. Oh, perhaps it doesn't. You can see the name of the patients are on the top. We had 4 patients with systemic onset JIA, and we had 2 cases of lupus. They've been all treated before. They were, of the systemic JIA cases, 2 were on tocilizumab and 2 were on AnnaCarin. They were severe. So they all fulfill the HLH 2004 criteria that were showed previously by Randy. We had CNS involvement that were very severe in 4 of the cases, and 2 of the patients also had pulmonary involvement, and these 2 cases were the cases who had reoccurring MIS. So how did it go for them? Well, they had some complications. They were very sick. They were giving etoposide in between 50 milligram per square meter to 100 milligram. We only had 1 case of severe myelosuppression due to etoposide. That was the first dose for the boy who's called Nils. He had a septicemia, which is definitely due to etoposide. The other ones did not. We had 1 case who had an EBV-driven MIS, so that girl also received rituximab, and by her we had late onset neutropenia, which needed therapy. But we had a very good outcome. So we had 4 children who are in complete response. They are very healthy. We had 1 girl, you see the girl who's called Jenny. She, unfortunately, when we were contacted, was in the ICU. She had an intracranial pressure of 40. The neurosurgeon said the only thing we can help her with, she was a beautiful girl with lupus, 15 years, is to a craniotomy, but she will probably, be a vegetable. We cannot do this. The parents still wanted us to go ahead. We treated her, and she's now motorically intact. She can do cartwheel, but she's really autistic. And I have to live with that decision that we still give her treatment, but her quality of life is not good. We have 1 little girl, Minelle. She has done a bone marrow transplant 2 months ago. I will tell her more about her, and she's also doing very, very well. So what about the cancer? We have followed these children for half a year to 6 years. What is their risk? This is not very long, is it? So the cumulative dose of etoposide is known to be the cause of cancer. And if you go to studies, you can see that you can estimate the risk into low, medium, high, and then you see the leukemia protocols. So if you go to the y-axis, you see 0 to 10 I indicated here. But in some of the leukemias, you give up to 30,000. So there's a very high span depending on what diagnosis is. And in blue, I marked what our case with primary HLH, the cumulative dose of etoposide, what they give. And how about our patients? They are there. Of course, I cannot promise they will not get cancer, but I could promise you if I had not treated them with etoposide, I would not be able to show them, okay? Now it will be a busy slide as well, and I will actually, before you look at it, talk like this again, because sometimes it's difficult to talk and look at the same time. So in Sweden, we have a pediatric rheumatology register. We try to add all the patients who are on biological treatment. We try to monitor them there. And we monitored disease activity, what drugs they are. And here I've entered the data in that register. So on the y-axis, you will see disease activity, and then you will see the time points and the treatment that's been given. And I will present 2 cases of pulmonary involvement. So this is Nils. Nils was a very healthy boy of 5 years of age, and he was diagnosed having systemic onset GIA. He was on treatment with steroids and AnnaCarin, and then he had a flare of MIS, so he was given cyclosporin. And then he had further flares of MIS, and he had septicemia and got very, very sick, and he was put on Etoposide. And you can see that his inflammation went down. And then you can see later on he had lung biopsy, because what happened is that even his inflammation responded very well to Etoposide. His lung involvement didn't 100%. He got very sick. He was diagnosed with pulmonary alveolar proteinosis, which Alexi told you about, is one of the known complications you can have with MIS. And he was really, really sick. So we did a lung biopsy, we did a BAL, we did high resolution CT, and he had this. But it was like it came a bit later, the anti-inflammatory response. We could lower the amounts of steroids he had. He would then put on another steroid-sparing drug, Immorale, and his pulmonary involvement went away. We cannot say if this was 100% Etoposide because it came later, but he's now very well, doesn't have any lung complications anymore. The other girl is a very young girl. She was 7 months of age when she started present as a systemic GI. We looked at all possible genes. We haven't found anything. You know, she had done whole genome. It could be we missed something, but she has the diagnosis of systemic GI. She had recurring MIS. We treated her with Etoposide. She was doing very well. Then she got the flu. And in connection with the flu, she got severely sick. She developed cardiac failure, respiratory failure, and she had severe pulmonary arterial hypertension. We tried to get compassionate use for other drugs, but it wasn't possible, so we didn't have an option. We gave her Etoposide again, and she responded very well to that. So she had 9 courses of total of Etoposide, and then she did flare again, and I felt I don't know what to do with her. So she's the girl who gone to bone marrow transplantation, because we were afraid that this will just reoccur, and in the end she will have a high dose of Etoposide and the risk for secondary malignancy will be too high. So should Etoposide be used? Well, it's not really simple. It's not like a plant homeopathic drug that is not without any toxicity. But I don't think that it should be viewed on as a really, really toxic drug. It has to be put in perspective. How toxic is it really? And I think this scale was shown by someone else. In severe cases, if you use a stratified treatment, I definitely would like to say yes, it should be used. And these are pictures from this summer that the parents sent me. So both Minel and Nils really agree with me in that. And I think this whole meeting is very, very good, because I think we need collaborative efforts, and we have to be patient-centered. And so in collaboration with the patients, the rheumatologists and the oncologists, we need to meet. We need to start talk to each other and form groups, and also include the intensivists in this, because we now have big head form with. We have to optimize stratified therapy, not overtreat these patients. But when we need to, we shouldn't be afraid of perhaps using agents that actually could help them. We need to study cancer risk with low-dose Etoposide. And I think to learn, we should have an international registry for these unusual cases. And being the chair of the MAS group for Histiocyte Society, we would like to organize a collaborative summit for intensivists, rheumatologists, oncologists who are interested in this. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to take questions. And soon you will have your coffee. Okay.
Thank you for the very helpful talk. I have two questions. One was you mentioned about the high rate of BMT failures. Is that in both primary and secondary HLH?
Most cases are primary, and we have a study that is not published yet where we compared patients from the eBMT register, and we compare them with severe plastic anemia and SCID that needs conditioning, and it seems like the cases who get the match-related donors for HLH do not do as well as we expect them to. We don't know why this is, but that's the case in these cases. We need to publish this, but we haven't done that yet.
And then my second question, if you don't mind, was just, it sounds like in certain of these cases you would use the one biologic like Kineret and then Etoposide being a second line, rather than switching to a different biologic.
Well, I went a bit quick, but like Minel, she was also giving tocilizumab. There were other ones who were on, we had on tocilizumab. With Minel, we went up to AnnaCarin for 10 milligram per square meter. I gave her IV AnnaCarin, and so we used that as first measurements. With the two of the CNS cases, they came in and were in coma. I mean, I could have shown you the MRI pictures. They were so sick. And in that case, with our experience for primary and CNS involvement, I mean, we know that CNS is bad news. We did not wait. But with the other ones, we tried AnnaCarin in a high dose first. I got the protocol from Randy to do the IV. It's not, sorry, for SOBI, it's not regulated in Sweden, but we tried that.
I was just getting at the idea of perhaps we shouldn't be going on to second or third biologic options, and just, is that your impression?
No, my impression is, and I think
disease severity.
I think it's the disease severity. So if it goes very fast, you have a CNS. I think that's also from the 362 that Randy and Angelo collected. The ones who died have a higher CNS. So I think with CNS, you have to be very careful. And then I think with these who do reoccur, and if you get pulmonary involvement and you try the other things, I mean, I cannot say. It's like 1-2 cases. We also had another case that I contacted some of you here who I thought was going to be my 7th case. She was a girl on Iceland, and she was 3-year-old with systemic GI. She also had PAP, pulmonary alveolar proteinosis. She got out of the ventilator by Etoposide, but then she turned out she had a very rare metabolic disease called prolidase deficiency. So we stopped, we didn't do any more, and unfortunately she died 2 months ago.
AnnaCarin, your first patient with lung disease, you mentioned pulmonary alveolar proteinosis. Could you describe, I think his name was Nils.
Nils, yeah.
Could you describe his histopathology a little bit better?
Yeah,
did he have interstitial lung disease as well?
Yes, let me see.
And do you have a follow-up chest CT on him?
Yes, I don't have that with me. So this is Nils. I didn't have the follow-up CT, but we, in all his, you can see he's had interstitial infiltrates. They were ground glass opacities. He had 3 bud nodules in extended lymphopathies. He had 2 balls, and they were bone milky fluid. And then the lung biopsy, which was after the etoposide, and then that showed that actually it was not so much ongoing inflammation. So when he had the biopsy, that was after the etoposide, but he still was having breathing difficulties, so we did that. But then it was not as much, but that was consistent with pulmonary alveolar proteinosis. So both the BAL, the CT, and the biopsy was inconsistent. And I don't have the follow-up, but his parents are both doctors. He's playing in the football team. He's running as his friends, and so I suppose his CT would be fine.
He's probably old enough to do pulmonary function testing. Do you happen to know his diffusion?
He had, you see here, if you look there, it's a spirometry. I don't know, that's a Swedish word, but it's a pulmonary function, so he had restrictive. Now he's followed in the north, so I don't know how it is, but I communicated with the parents, and they say he's on the football team and he runs like the other people.
What about the diffusional CO capacity, do you know?
I don't know that, but he had when he was at the worst, he required oxygen, so he was on 86 in saturation. But what also happened, what the parents experienced, was that when we did the ball, he didn't have a whole lung. We can't do that. We have never done that. But he had a ball, and that made it better both times. And also, once the steroids could be lowered, tapered, that was also better. But we don't know, because we think if we hadn't treated him with the etoposide, the inflammation would have driven it, and he was very, very sick.
So, Alexia, based on that biopsy result, just by the description, it sounds like it was that the appearance of the biopsy. Thank you. So, based on that biopsy description, at least, it sounds like the appearance of the biopsy would be more like a classical GM-CSF antibody kind of PAP, which has significant alveolar filling, obviously, but has much, much less of the inflammation than we're seeing in most of these patients with JIA, and has relatively normal-looking alveolar architecture and alveolar appearance, which is why you can probably mobilize the PAP with BAL, and you can do therapeutic lavage and get benefit from it.
I'm not a lung doctor, but I just they gave me this information, yeah.
Well, it's different than most of what we're seeing.
I think
but we do have some patients who do have some of this feature as well.
It would have been interesting to get a biopsy before we treated him, but we don't have that.